Gather round the campfire, my friend. I've got a tale to tell, a legend that's been whispered through generations, and it all starts with a seemingly ordinary camping trip in the heart of the woods. My name's Tom, and I've always been a sucker for campfire stories, but this one, well, it's a bit different. It was a crisp autumn evening when I, along with a group of friends, decided to embark on a weekend camping adventure. The forest was alive with the rustle of leaves and the symphony of cicadas, but the atmosphere had that eerie chill that only comes when the sun dips below the horizon. We set up our campsite near an old oak tree, its branches reaching out like skeletal fingers toward the sky. As the night settled in and the flames of our campfire danced, my friend Mark began to recount a local legend. They say, he began, leaning in closer, that deep within these woods, there's a creature that's been lurking for centuries. He spoke of the Wendigo, a creature from Algonquian folklore. According to the legend, it was a malevolent spirit that possessed humans, transforming them into ravenous, cannibalistic beings. We all laughed it off as a classic campfire tale, but there was something about the way Mark told it that sent shivers down my spine. As the night grew darker and the fire burned low, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The wind whispered through the trees, and the shadows cast by the flickering flames seemed to take on a life of their own. But I shrugged it off as simple nerves, my imagination running wild. We eventually retired to our tents, and I drifted off to sleep, lulled by the sounds of nature. I awoke to a piercing scream. It was Mark. I rushed out of my tent to find him standing in the clearing, trembling and pointing into the darkness. I saw it, he stammered. I saw the Wendigo. We all scrambled out of our tents, and our flashlights passed the night, revealing nothing but the dense forest around us. Mark's face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. It was out there, he insisted, watching us. We searched the area, but found no trace of any creature, and the atmosphere was charged with fear. Mark's encounter with the Wendigo, or whatever he had seen, had shaken us all. As we huddled around the campfire, Mark's story took on a life of its own. We were on edge, our nerves raw, and every rustle of leaves or hoot of an owl sent us into a frenzy. But here's the twist, my friend. Just as we were about to pack up and head back to civilization, we heard something in the distance. A low, mournful howl that chilled us to the bone. It was a sound like no other, an eerie, guttural cry that seemed to come from the depths of the forest. Our flashlights passed the darkness, and there, in the shadows, we saw it, a figure gaunt and emaciated, with eyes that seemed to glow with an unnatural hunger. It was the Wendigo, or at least what we believed to be the Wendigo. We were paralyzed with fear as it approached, its movements graceful and predatory. But just as it came into the light of our campfire, it seemed to dissipate like smoke in the wind. It was as if the creature had never been there. We were left in a state of shock, unable to comprehend what we had just witnessed. Had it been real, or was it a shared hallucination brought on by fear and exhaustion? We couldn't be sure. As we packed up our camp and made our way back to civilization, the legend of the Wendigo had left an indelible mark on us. It was a tale that had come to life, or at least we believed it had. So next time you gather round a campfire and hear a legend, my friend, remember that sometimes the line between myth and reality can blur, and the darkness of the woods can hold secrets that defy explanation. And be wary of what you might encounter in the heart of the wilderness, for there are some legends that are best left undisturbed. All right, gather round the campfire and let me tell you a story that still gives me chills when I recall it. My name's Jack, and I've always been the outdoorsy type. There's something about the wilderness that's both soothing and unsettling, a balance that's hard to explain. A few years ago, I went camping with a group of friends in a remote part of the forest. We were all about enjoying the simplicity of nature, and what better way to end a day in the wild than by huddling around a campfire? We set up camp in a small clearing, surrounded by towering trees that blocked out the moonlight. The air was filled with the sounds of the nocturnal creatures, and the campfire crackled and hissed, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to taunt us with their secrets. As the night grew darker, I began to notice something peculiar. The fire's glow, which had been steady, started flickering erratically. I assumed it was just a result of the wind, but the breeze was oddly still. I kept an eye on it, and sure enough the flames would sputter and die down, only to roar back to life moments later. My friends noticed it too, and we exchanged uneasy glances. We dismissed it as a strange but ultimately harmless phenomenon. The conversation around the fire gradually shifted to ghost stories and campfire legends. One of my friends, Sarah, began to share a local tale about the woods we were in. She spoke of a spirit, an entity that had been rumored to inhabit these very woods. It was said to be a guardian of the forest, a presence that protected the wilderness from those who meant harm. We all listened intently, but just as she was about to reveal the legend's twist, the fire went out completely, plunging us into utter darkness. I reached for my flashlight and quickly switched it on, illuminating worried faces all around. We tried to restart the fire, but it was as if the wood had turned against us. No matter how much we tried, it refused to catch, like it had become allergic to flames. As the darkness pressed in, our unease grew. We had enough flashlights to keep the area lit, but the absence of the campfire's warm glow left us feeling vulnerable. We began to wonder if there was something more to the legend Sarah had been sharing. It was then that strange things began to happen. The wood seemed to come alive with eerie noises. Twigs snapped, leaves rustled, and the wind carried whispers that sounded like distant voices. But we were alone, weren't we? We decided to pack up and leave, thinking that maybe the spirits of the forest weren't too thrilled with our presence. But just as we were about to head out, the fire came back to life, roaring brighter and hotter than before. It was as if the very act of leaving had offended it. As we watched the flames dance, we realized that the occurrences we had witnessed, the flickering, the unexplained noises, were all connected to the fire. It was the epicenter of these strange events. But here's the twist, my friend. As we huddled around the now vibrant fire, we heard a sound that sent shivers down our spines. It was a voice, a whisper that seemed to come from the flames themselves. "Stay." We all looked at each other, horrified and entranced. The voice seemed to echo in our minds, urging us to remain. It was both alluring and menacing, like a siren's call that promised warmth and danger in equal measure. We had to make a choice: stay and risk whatever force was behind these strange occurrences, or leave and risk incurring the wrath of the forest. In the end, we couldn't resist the pull of the fire. As we sat there, entranced by the dancing flames and the mysterious voice, we couldn't help but feel that we were being watched. The shadows cast by the fire seemed to elongate and twist, taking on forms that were impossible to discern. And then, without warning, the fire went out once again, and this time it stayed extinguished. The darkness that enveloped us was suffocating, and we felt a deep sense of dread. We fled into the night, unsure of what we had encountered, but certain that we had narrowly escaped something beyond our comprehension. The forest had whispered its secrets, and we had listened. So the next time you're out in the wilderness and the campfire starts acting strangely, my friend, remember that the woods may hold secrets that are best left undisturbed. There are forces in nature that defy explanation, and sometimes it's better to heed their warnings and retreat to the safety of the known. I've always been a fan of camping, even more so those late-night campfire stories. They say there's a thin line between reality and legend, but my camping trip last summer blurred that line like never before. What began as a typical getaway with a few friends soon turned into a nightmare. campfire legend we'd scoffed at ended up becoming our worst nightmare. We set up camp in a secluded forest, the tall pines casting eerie shadows under the moonlight. The night was so still that you could hear the leaves rustle and the insects whisper. My friends Rachel, Tim, and Jake and I sat around the crackling fire, reminiscing about our college days. Tim, always the storyteller, decided to entertain us with the tale of the wandering shadows. As he began his story, the flames danced, creating strange patterns that seemed to mimic his words. The wandering shadows, he said, were malevolent spirits that haunted these woods. According to local law, they were once people who had gotten lost in the forest and were never seen again. Their restless souls were said to seek revenge on the living for their untimely demise. I laughed along with the others, thinking it was just Tim's way of adding some spooky atmosphere to our camping trip. The firelight cast sinister shadows on his face, enhancing the effect of his story, but I knew it was all in good fun, or so I thought. Later that night, as we drifted off to sleep in our respective tents, I couldn't shake a feeling of unease. My companion's laughter and Tim's story continued to haunt my thoughts. With a sigh, I tried to brush it off and closed my eyes. The night was unrelentingly dark, and I suddenly woke to strange whispers. It was like the wind was carrying hushed voices through the forest. I stepped out of my tent to investigate, but all I could see was a dense fog that had rolled in from nowhere. The darkness was suffocating, and I couldn't even see the campfire's faint glow. Rachel, Tim, Jake, I called out, but there was no response. The silence that followed was deafening. I stumbled back to my tent and grabbed my flashlight. I shone it toward the campfire area, and the sight I beheld left me frozen with terror. My friends were there, but they weren't themselves. Their eyes glowed an eerie shade of crimson, and their faces were contorted into grotesque masks of anger. In a panic, I called out to them, but they didn't seem to recognize me. Instead, they approached the campfire, speaking in tongues I couldn't understand. I watched in horror as they began to chant and dance around the fire, their movements growing increasingly frenzied. It was like they were being possessed by some malevolent force. I couldn't comprehend what I was witnessing. Were these the wandering shadows Tim had told us about, or was this some sick joke they were playing on me? With trembling hands, I reached for my phone, hoping to call for help, but the moment I turned it on, it was like the world had shifted. The campfire, my friends, the entire forest, everything around me morphed into a nightmarish version of reality. I realized that the legends weren't just stories. They were warnings, a desperate plea from those who had encountered the malevolent spirits. I was trapped in a waking nightmare, and I didn't know if I'd ever wake up. I stayed hidden in my tent, watching my friends spiral further into madness. Their chants grew louder, more frantic, and their dancing became violent. It was as if they were possessed by something far more sinister than I could ever comprehend. And then it happened. The most horrifying and heart-wrenching part of the night, their possessed bodies began to turn on each other. The frenzied dance around the fire devolved into a bloody battle, and the forest echoed with their screams. Tears welled up in my eyes as I realized that I was the only one left untouched by the malevolent presence that had overtaken my friends. I couldn't save them, and I couldn't understand why I had been spared. Was it some twisted game, or did the spirits have something more sinister in mind for me? Hours passed, and as dawn's faint light broke through the trees, the violence ceased, and my friends lay lifeless, surrounded by the haunting forest. The malevolent spirits, or whatever they were, had finished their macabre dance. I emerged from my tent, trembling and filled with dread. The once beautiful forest now felt like a cursed place, forever scarred by the horrors of that night. The campfire, now a pile of smoldering embers, gave off a faint, eerie glow. I stood there, alone and shaken, unsure of what to do next. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the horrors I had witnessed. And then it hit me, a terrifying realization that sent shivers down my spine. I wasn't spared. I was chosen to carry the legend forward, to become a part of the wandering shadows. My friends had been transformed into malevolent spirits, and now it was my turn to dance, to chant, and to haunt the next unsuspecting camper who ventured into these woods. As I began to feel a strange compulsion, an urge to join the cursed dance, I knew that I could never escape the campfire legend. The line between reality and myth had blurred, and I had become a living nightmare, trapped in the never-ending cycle of the wandering shadows.